So yeah, nice to see everyone here this evening. And this is the last session in the Science and Technology Day at the Peatlands Pavilion, and it'll be on the central Congo Peatlands and the Congo Peatland project. And first of all, to open us up for the evening is Jean-Jacques Bambuta, who is the coordinator of the Peatland Management Unit in the Democratic Republic of Congo, sitting in the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. And he has a really excellent hat that he likes to wear.
Professor Simon Lewis, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you, Simon Lewis, for inviting DRC to this Peatland Congo Peat side event. My unit, which is Management Peatland Unit in DRC, exists because Congo Peat have provided the first information on peatland in DRC. This is why the Ministry of Environment have decided to create my unit. I'm Jean-Jacques Bambuta. As I was saying, I'm working for the Ministry of Environment in DRC, and I'm in charge of peatland. So this is my last presentation for the day. I was here many times. I would like just to share with you some information, but you can find some information in my English over there, but I will speak to you in French. Alors, je voudrais vous parler de deux choses. La première, c'est le besoin en termes de savoir sur les tourbières. Comme je l'avais dit, nous, République démocratique du Congo, nous sommes engagés dans l'élaboration d'une politique nationale des tourbières, mais cette politique n'aura pas de sens si elle ne s'appuie pas sur des données scientifiques, que ce soit en termes de cartographie, que ce soit en termes d'inventaire des tourbières, que ce soit en termes de suivi. Alors, ces données sont importantes pour nous parce que ce sont celles-là qui doivent éclairer la politique. Alors, lorsque nous parlons des tourbières, nous sommes là. Nous, RDC, nous considérons les tourbières comme étant une thématique émergente parce que ça fait tout simplement 4 ans à peu près depuis que nous avons commencé à parler des tourbières. Et donc, il s'est fait que nous avons besoin d'informations en termes de la formation des tourbières, comment les tourbières se sont formées. On a besoin d'informations sur leur potentiel et leur étendue, mais surtout leur vulnérabilité. Parce que les tourbières de la RDC sont en réalité à 99% intactes, parce qu'elles sont dans une zone inondée et d'accès difficile. Mais nous n'allons pas attendre qu'il puisse y avoir des menaces. On ne va pas attendre que ces tourbières soient attaquées avant que nous ne puissions décider de monter une politique nationale dédiée à cet écosystème. Donc, sur ce point-là, nous apprécions les différentes informations que les scientifiques, comme nos collègues de CongoPeat, mettent à notre disposition. Alors, nous pensons aussi qu'à ce stade, étant donné que nous avons déjà reçu beaucoup de cartes sur l'étendue de tourbières de la RDC, il est important que les collègues qui sont en train d'évoluer dans la cartographie puissent harmoniser leur méthodologie afin de nous mettre entre les mains une carte qui fasse consensus. Bien sûr, les erreurs ne vont pas manquer, les limites ne vont pas manquer, mais nous pensons qu'une méthodologie harmonisée permettra à ce que nous puissions avoir des données qui fassent l'unanimité. Et donc, la politique nationale de tourbières, comme je le disais, a besoin d'informations scientifiques, mais aussi, elle a besoin de tenir compte des données qui peuvent être revisables. Par exemple, si aujourd'hui, les collègues de CongoPeat nous disent que cet espace que nous avions exclu de nos cartes en disant que ce n'était pas une tourbière, mais nous revenons là-dessus 2 ans après, nous disons que c'est une tourbière, il va falloir que nous puissions remodeler notre politique. Parce que, en réalité, en République démocratique du Congo, nous pouvons, dans un certain niveau, assister à une superposition d'usage des terres. D'où l'importance de l'aménagement, d'où l'importance de bien identifier une politique foncière. Alors, tout cela doit tenir dans une vision nationale. Le deuxième élément que je voudrais souligner, ce sont en fait les besoins en termes de collecte d'informations sur les tourbières. Le premier besoin, en effet, c'est la cartographie. Nous voulons que la cartographie puisse se poursuivre afin qu'au bout d'1 an, de 2 ans, que nous puissions avoir le cœur net sur l'étendue réelle des tourbières de la RDC. Et donc, il y a encore du travail pour les collègues qui sont dans la cartographie et l'inventaire. Nous voulons aussi poursuivre la collecte des données générales sur la formation. Il est important que nous puissions comprendre comment nous en sommes arrivés là. D'où sont venues les tourbières. Parce que si nous savons comment les tourbières ont été formées, nous pouvons aussi identifier les éléments ou les potentielles activités qui peuvent constituer des menaces qui vont réduire la fonctionnalité écologique de ces tourbières et jusqu'à en faire des menaces. D'autres informations dont nous avons besoin, ça concerne la botanique des tourbières. En fait, nous nous posons la question, est-ce qu'il existerait une végétation unique aux tourbières? Si oui, quels seraient les éléments constitutifs de cette végétation ou de cette botanique? Donc, on a besoin de pouvoir identifier ce genre d'informations. Un autre volet en termes de besoins, en termes d'études, ça concerne les questions hydrologiques. Quelle peut être la question que nous nous posons, c'est de savoir en fait quel est le seuil de saturation qui peut être supporté par les tourbières. Jusqu'à quel niveau de saturation, quel est le niveau de saturation dont les tourbières de la RDC peuvent avoir besoin. Vous voyez que toutes ces études méritent d'être menées. On a donc beaucoup d'études qui doivent être menées à différents niveaux. Et nous pensons aussi en termes d'évaluation de carbone, il est important qu'on puisse déjà y réfléchir et que nous puissions avoir des données sur la fluctuation du carbone qui est stocké dans les zones à tourbières. Donc, on a pas mal de champs en termes de collecte de données, en termes de collecte d'informations scientifiques. Alors, pour finir, je voudrais remercier nos collègues de CongoPeat et dire qu'il est important que les initiatives que les scientifiques sont en train de mener puissent avoir une jonction avec la politique nationale ou avec la dynamique nationale. Nous, en République démocratique du Congo, nous avons l'avantage d'initier une dynamique nationale des tourbières très active. C'est pratiquement chaque mois que nous organisons des réunions, c'est pratiquement chaque mois que nous avons des activités sur les terrains. Et donc, il est important que ce genre d'interventions comme celles qui sont menées par CongoPeat puissent aussi avoir de passerelles avec la dynamique nationale. Voilà un peu, mesdames et messieurs, les quelques éléments que j'avais à partager pour ce jour. Jeudi, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. So the program is that we'll have a short video now. This will be the premiere showing of the CongoPeat video to give you a flavor of what the ecosystem is like. And then I will give an update on the latest science, followed by Professor Corne Awango, who will dial in from Kisangani in Democratic Republic of Congo. Professor Ifo Suspense from Marien Ngwabi University in Brazzaville. Sophie Stotterdon from University of Nottingham, and Lyra Miles from UNEP-WCMC, World Conservation Monitoring Center. And then we'll have a question and answer after that. So if people can hold on to their questions till then, and we'll get all the panel up, including other members of the Congo Peat team, and then we'll take everyone's questions in a discussion at the same time. Right, I think just a great video to give a kind of insight into what the ecosystems like. Can I get the slides up? So I'm going to talk now about the Congo Peat project and some of the newer results that we've got. Have I got a clicker? Excellent. So these central Congo swamps are in the second largest wetland in the tropics, mostly swamp forests, and with very high biodiversity of animals, including high densities of forest elephants and lowland gorillas. And it's pretty undisturbed and is very far from international markets. So we had this idea some years ago that perhaps there was peat under parts of these wetlands. So we headed off into the area and found these flooded forests. And pretty much once we walked several kilometers in from the river access, then we did find peat. And we could use this association between the peat and the vegetation to then use remote sensing, satellite data to try and map the area of peatland. So using both optical and radar data and our ground data, we produced this first map of the central Congo peatlands in 2017. And we think covers about 145,000 square kilometers of area and about 30 billion tons or gigatons of carbon. So a globally significant store of carbon. But there were huge uncertainties here. We didn't really have very much, almost no data from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've been working in one portion of this area. We also had a very wide uncertainty about the amount of carbon that was there. It could be a globally significant amount, but it could have been much lower if there was very little peat or very shallow peat in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But what we showed in our kind of central estimates, that about a quarter of the world's carbon in peat in the tropics is in the central Congo Basin. And this 5% of the area of the Congo Basin perhaps stores around the similar amount of carbon as in all the trees in the other 95%. So very, very carbon dense. But there were uncertainties there. But we were given a good boost afterwards by the South-South cooperation and the Brazzaville Declaration between Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Indonesia to sign a declaration to protect and keep wet the peatlands. And also by getting a new funding from the UK government to be able to have a bigger team work on these central Congo peatlands. And we have two questions, really: how much carbon is stored there, and how does this system function, so we can build a mathematical representations of it and then understand what the impacts might be of various threats to the region. So we have a big team of people, including newly training PhD students from Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and have expertise running from paleoecologists through to remote sensing specialists, greenhouse gas flux specialists, and climate modelers. We use a variety of techniques on the ground, from using fixed-wing drones to try and map some of the peatlands, to very low-tech methods like measuring all the fronds on a palm to work out how much carbon is stored in the palm trees, and satellite data to scale up our estimates of greenhouse gas fluxes and carbon. And when we went to the Democratic Republic of Congo, to a number of places, we did find peat where we predicted it to be. So this is the new, all of the dots on this. The inset map is the map of the peatlands, and then the large map is a cutout of that. And each of those dots are somewhere we've been on the ground and measured the peat depth, brought samples back to the UK to measure the carbon content, and mapped the vegetation there, so that we can then use that to produce a next generation, second generation of maps. And this is our second generation of mapping the central Congo peatlands. What we found is a bit bigger area than we had before, about 14% larger, so 165,000 square kilometers of peatland. This is to 30 centimeters depth and more than 65% organic matter. If we compare it to the previous map, all this additional data has given us a slightly larger area, and it's mostly around the periphery of the peatlands in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So that's where we've got a bit more extensive peatlands in this second generation mapping. With all this additional data, then we can make a much better estimate of the carbon stocks by taking our map and getting the distance from the edge of the peatland which is a critical factor in estimating the depth of peat across the region, which we can then combine with our ground data to work out, to calculate how much carbon is stored per unit depth, and then combine that into a map to get the first spatial map of carbon storage in the for the region. And if we take all those every half a hectare and the carbon estimate, and then sum those together, then we get 31 petagrams, which is equivalent to gigatons, billion tons of carbon storage. But our uncertainty is now radically shrunk. There's certainly a globally significant amount of carbon stored, and we can see high areas of carbon storage, 4,000 tons of carbon per hectare stored in both the Republic of Congo and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We can also use this new data to find out some additional new results. So we previously thought the oldest date that we had for the carbon was about 17,000 years old. But now we show that some carbon, these peatlands started accumulating carbon about 42,000 years ago. So some of this peat is some of the oldest peat on Earth in the central Congo peatlands. We can also estimate the carbon sequestration rate of these peatlands, not the store, but how much is actively taken out of the atmosphere. We think that's around, using these radiocarbon dates, around 2 million tons of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere and stored in peat each year on average across the central Congo peatlands. There's an additional ecosystem service that they're providing. So what about the future of the central Congo Basin peatlands? So this is a picture of Southeast Asia, which also has had large areas of peatlands, which have been drained and used for agriculture. And this didn't start that long ago. It was only 24 years ago that the Mega Rice project first began. And since then, huge areas of peatland have been drained and converted to oil palm and other plantations. And those benefits of those plantations have come with some serious problems that could affect the central Congo Basin if it went down that route. I just want to highlight some of those about Southeast Asia. So this is the number of people impacted by poor air quality from fires that are out of control in the dry season, driven by the drainage of the peatlands. And in a heavy fire year, when there's an El Nino, the kind of conditions that might be coming more regularly in the future, about 66 million people were affected by this poor air quality. And even in a non-fire extreme fire year, more than 20 million people are affected. This has big impacts on health. So there's an estimate that in 2015, 44,000 people, about one in 1,000 people will die prematurely because of that poor air quality and air pollution. So there's mortality impacts from these fires. And if we look at the economic impacts of these fires in Southeast Asia, they're causing at least 1%, costs of at least 1% of Indonesia's GDP each year, and some years up to more than that. From the impacts on crops, from the impacts of the carbon emissions, and from the impacts on people's health. So they're really big negative consequences of draining these peatlands. Currently, the Congo peatlands are very intact, but there are threats from oil exploration, and also on the Democratic Republic of Congo side, some around 20% of the peatland area is covered by logging concessions that are currently under a moratorium, but they are covered by logging concessions. So the threat is there. And even if these peatlands are well protected, they could be damaged just by accident. So this is a picture of a logging camp and a road that was built for exploiting the dryland forests. And this light green patch you can see is flooded forest. And this was taken in 1989. And this was taken in 2018. And it's the same place. You can see the same logging camp and the same road, but the road has changed the drainage and has killed all of the trees for many kilometers up this band of wetland forest. And I think this was just accidental, without thinking about the impacts on the hydrology of these new infrastructure developments. So I think what we need is more dialogue and more funding to do more science to get the best information out there to both Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo and the international community to better manage these peatlands going forward into the future. So my take-home message is Central Congo Basin is the world's largest tropical peatland, shared between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Congo. These are some of the oldest peats on Earth. They store around 31 billion tons of carbon, so a really globally significant store, and they're used sustainably by the local population at present. So thank you very much, and now I'll hand on to Cornelia Wango, who I hope is online from Kisangani.
I can share my screen. Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. So I'm joining you from Kisangani, and I'm going to shortly talk about the importance of the peatland at the Democratic Republic of Congo. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, I think there is no need to repeat again about the importance of peatlands worldwide and specifically to the Congo Basin. And since we have said it's a large area covered by wetlands, and within it we have peatlands, and that store 30 billion tons of carbon, as Simon just come to say. However, how many of us truly understand the peatland and its role in our environment, still being a big question even for us as scientists? We know very little about the biodiversity and the importance of peatland in the Congo Basin, since it's only 4 years that we start studying those ecosystems in the central Congo Basin. But what they provide, I think we know about the ecosystem services that most of our ecosystem, even the forest, the mangrove, and peatland themselves can provide worldwide. And the first one is about the ecological importance of the peatlands ecosystems. So they have 4 of the ecosystem service that they can provide. And briefly, I'm not going to go through all of them because you know them, but the provisioning of services like important for rural communities. And as you can see, comparing, taking into account the 2 Congos, 100 millions of people are relying to peatland for their livelihood. And also it's regulating services. So it provides us to regulate the flood and also water production and against the climate change. That's the important role of the peatlands today, because they store carbon and also they sequestrate carbon on above the ground. And they are also supporting services, the primary production and nutrient cycling. But above all, they are producing for us in the 2 Congos more food. You can see that people on those areas rely, there are many activities is fishing and also collecting non-timber products and also medicinal plants that are used by local communities for their livelihood. So nutrition for everything they are taking, the protein they are taking from the ecosystem on the peatlands are very important for local community in that area. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, and also it's marvel ecological ecosystems. So it's globally known that it hosts a large area of biodiversity, rainforest. So what we are doing now, we are trying to document all the ecosystem, the forest ecosystem of the Central Congo Basin peatland within the two countries that was little known or explored so far. And we are seeing that it's a typical area with hardwood swamp forest and also palm-dominated swamp forest that are more important on the peatlands of the Central Congo Basin. And within that, there are only few tree species that cover or that are occurring on those areas. So it's a quite specific species that are adapted to peatlands as wetland areas. Also, the forest also has high density of some wildlife. And in our case, we have, for example, the bonobos in two of our protected area. They are only, they live only on those areas in the Park National de Salonga and Lac Tumba, where the bonobos occurs. And there are also large number of chimpanzees and forest elephants that we know more from those areas. And specifically, we have three species of crocodiles, but one of them, the dwarf crocodiles, makes use of the peat by creating nests and burrow to lay their eggs. So it's their appropriate habitat for that species. And if peatlands disappear, that means that species is it's going extinct. And it's one of the most important wildlife or animal protein that people on the peatlands rely on. Next, please. Next. And the peatlands in the Central Congo Basin are also important for their, not only the biodiversity, but of conservation purpose also. For the biodiversity, we know very little. That's why we are trying with our mapping to combine some other multidisciplinary studies to try to document what we didn't know so far. For example, in terms of biodiversity, in one site, our famous peatland areas of Lokolama, we covered 110 tree species. That's only 3 species, and we're still adding more. And 53 species of fish, 40 species of mammals, and 26 species of reptiles, and 17 species of birds that have been so far identified or reported by the hunters and fishermen. But most important also within the Congo Basin peatland is the connectivities that is provided by many rivers and lakes. In our case, we count 15 rivers that are tributaries of the Congo River, and with 2 large lakes, the Lake Maindombe and Lake Tumba, that are filling by water coming from the peatland. So it's a very important network and corridors for vegetations also associated to the peatlands. But in terms of conservation also, that is the largest wetlands in tropical Africa, and it has been designed as Ramsar site. It has 3 protected area, the Ngiri, the Tumba Maindombe site in our Democratic Republic of Congo, but connecting to the other Congo also. So it's a very important area in terms of hydrography, and but also for conservation in terms of landscape conservation. And it's very important for us also in terms of birds diversity. Next, please. Next, please. Next. Yeah, the importance of Central Congo Basin peatland is in terms also of rural communities. They rely on food and everything that they can harvest from the peatland. That is the benefit use of some species for food or fruits that provide carbohydrate, protein, and spices. And many species within the peatland provide that, including the palm-dominated species within the peatlands in the two countries is largely used for even eating the fruit or providing palm wine in the two countries. And there are also many other species that are used by local community to provide also fiber for many species, including the rattan and the palm trees themselves are largely used by the two countries local communities for their purpose. There are also many species that we can have like bioenergy, and that many comes in part with fruit that people eat for different purposes that gives them also bioenergy. And for years and years during the colonial time, there have been many species that they exploited like for rubber or their latex or resin that have been extracting from the peatlands. And there are many edible fruits also that we found there, including medicinal plants and many other species that are used like non-timber forest product. There is, as I said before, the conservation value with wildlife that is unique to the peatlands area. Next, please. Next. Next, please. Yeah, the other and the last importance of the ecosystem service that provide by the peatlands ecosystems is the cultural services. And that is more linked also to socio-economic reality of the peatlands in the area. And for the two countries, the peatlands are also our rich cultural diversity. And there are some beliefs on the peatlands so that we have some unique creatures that are in the peatlands. That's the case for Mokele Mbembe in the Republic of Congo and Monama in DRC that we believe are only on those areas. And they're making their importance, the benefit of the existence of those creators is that it makes the peatland to be protected by local community as their biocultural heritage. They are also important, as I said before, for local nutrition and livelihood. There are huge species that are used and that are sources of food or income to local communities, including also like they are natural dispensary in case of natural medicinal plants. And the other importance also is, as Simon said before, it's coming from the importance of national economy. So it's a hardwood forest, so it provide also valuable timbers, but that exploiting them brings more threats to the peatlands. And there is also, it's expected to have rich oil beneath on the underground of the peatlands that may make huge economy of the peatlands, but it's contrasting to the importance, the ecological importance of peatlands in the entire area. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, considering all that I said before, I think that the peatlands are all in one in terms of their ecosystem they provide. And also when we compare to the Sustainable Development Goals, I think all the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Goals fits within the peatlands. They provide all of them. That's why we should not leave one beyond, because it's very important if we have to accelerate the attenuation of the climate change, because they are easily linked to the environment, the social economics, and also the sustainable development. And to to reach that, I think that it's a very important importance from the partnership. We are counting to everybody to come together so that we can reach our commitment to protect that rich heritage area that we need, all of us, because they really they are more important. For that, we are just, it's 4 years now, but we are, for me, it's like we are in the beginning, because every time we explore a new site, we come up with new habitat type and also maybe some new species. So far as we have started, we are underway to describe 2 new species that have not been known before, and many are adding as the first record in that area. So it's very important, not only in terms of biodiversity, but in terms also of the climate change and in terms of rural community who rely to those ecosystems. So there is more work to be done, as we are just at the beginning of mapping and understanding the peatlands in the central Congo basin. And first, thanks a lot, because we have been more working in the north of the equator lines, but recently we started going at the south and exploring the Mindombe region. That is completely different also to the north that we have been dealing so far. We think with that complementary data coming in, it's going to fuel our CongoPeat database, so that we come up with a full understanding of Central Congo Basin peatlands. Next, please. Next, please. Next and the last. Yeah, and at the last, so I have to think aloud my acknowledgement to the founders and donors and investigators, and specifically to the University of Leeds, who associated us to this investigation that we are going on. And I think that the next year is going to be more productive, so that we attain our objective to cover all the entire area of peatland covered by the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you very much. I appreciate.
Great, thanks to Corne, and I'm so happy that the internet held up in Kisangani. So now we're going to pass over to Professor Suspense Averti, who is going to be on the screen. He's actually recorded his, so he'll be live afterwards for the Q&A.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir. C'est un réel plaisir pour moi de vous faire cette présentation. Et quel que soit l'endroit du monde où vous vous trouvez, veuillez recevoir nos salutations. Moi, c'est Ifo Suspense Averti. Je suis professeur associé à l'Université Marien, autrement maître de conférence en écologie forestière, spécialiste des stocks et des flux de carbone dans les écosystèmes tropicaux. Avant de rentrer dans le développement de notre sujet, je voudrais tout d'abord vous présenter mon pays, la République du Congo. C'est un pays qui se trouve au cœur de l'Afrique centrale, qui s'étend sur environ 342 000 km². Ce pays regorge de nombreuses ressources naturelles. Parmi les plus importantes, nous avons le pétrole, qui est la première source de revenus du pays et participe à plus de 70% au PIB national. Nous avons les forêts qui s'étendent du nord au sud et qui participent à plus de 6% au PIB de la République du Congo. Ce pays est peuplé d'environ 5 millions d'habitants et dont près de 70% occupe le sud de la République du Congo. Le nord de la République du Congo est essentiellement forestier et n'a pas beaucoup d'habitants à cause de la présence de la plus vaste étendue de zones humides que le pays regorge. C'est dans ce pays ayant des massifs de forêt très importants qu'a été découvert, sinon mise en lumière, l'existence d'une grande quantité et grande superficie de tourbières qui s'étendent sur des milliers de kilomètres carrés. Cette étude a été publiée en 2017 dans la revue Nature et a permis de mettre à la disposition de la communauté nationale, la République du Congo, mais aussi de la communauté internationale, l'existence de ces tourbes d'une quantité incroyable, inimaginable, qui font l'objet aujourd'hui de tout l'intérêt porté par la communauté internationale. Et la figure que nous vous présentons ici montre l'étendue de la distribution de cette tourbière qui se caractérise par le fait de l'existence des tourbières forestières, des tourbières non forestières. Et vous voyez bien, à travers cette carte qui est devenue célèbre, que nous avons de la tourbe non seulement en République démocratique du Congo, mais bien entendu en République du Congo, notre pays. Pour ce qui est de la superficie des tourbières entre les deux pays, il faut dire que la République du Congo abrite actuellement, suivant les dernières études qui ont été faites, 5,4 millions d'hectares. Et que ces 5,4 millions d'hectares contiennent près de 10 milliards de tonnes de carbone sur les 31 milliards de carbone que contiennent l'ensemble de la grande tourbière unique qui a été découverte par l'équipe CongoPeat dans le bassin du Congo. Vous avez l'image à votre gauche qui présente là une carotte de tourbe récemment prise dans la cuvette centrale, la cuvette en République du Congo. Puisque nous abordons la thématique sur l'importance des tourbières en République du Congo, le premier point que nous voulons relever ici, c'est l'importance sur le plan politique. Il faut avouer que depuis la publication de cet article en 2017, de nombreux efforts de communication ont été faits à travers différentes parties. Et nous voulons ici répertorier pour vous, chers auditeurs plutôt et participants, quelques points qui soulignent de l'importance politique de cette question de la tourbière en République du Congo. Premièrement, il y a la déclaration de Brazzaville qui date du 23 mars 2018, qui a été publiée à l'issue de la réunion de l'initiative mondiale sur les tourbières dans sa 3e édition. Le deuxième point qui souligne l'importance politique de cette question, c'est l'engagement pris par le chef de l'État de la République du Congo, notamment dans la signature de la lettre d'intention CAFI lors de sa rencontre avec le président français. L'autre point très important qui nous confirme de l'importance politique a été ce Conseil des ministres finalement qui fera date du 20 avril 2018, au cours duquel la ministre de l'Environnement avait pris son temps pour sensibiliser le gouvernement sur la publication de l'équipe de CongoPeat de 2017, mais aussi sur l'importance environnementale et écologique de la tourbière. À l'issue de ce conseil de ministres, des décisions avaient été prises, des engagements plutôt pris pour préserver et sauvegarder la tourbière de la République du Congo. Et deuxième et dernièrement, sinon le dernier point, c'est le discours d'investiture du président de la République lorsqu'il a été réélu cette année. Il a dans son discours d'investiture souligné encore l'importance pour lui et pour le pays, le Congo, de conserver, de bien gérer la tourbière. Ce sont là les différents points saillants et marquants dans la République du Congo qui soulignent de l'engagement du pays à prendre en compte les avis des scientifiques à travers la publication de 2017. En dehors de l'importance politique suite à la découverte de la tourbière, il y a aussi que la publication de 2017 et les derniers travaux de recherche ont mis en valeur l'importance sur le plan environnemental. Le stock total de carbone contenu dans la tourbe actuellement est estimé à environ 31 milliards de tonnes de carbone, ce qui représente 3 années et demie des émissions annuelles anthropiques d'un pays comme les États-Unis. Mais puisque le Congo regorge 10 milliards de tonnes, nous pouvons dire que les 10 milliards de tonnes représentent une année des émissions mondiales des gaz à effet de serre d'origine anthropique. D'où il est important pour notre pays, le Congo, de pouvoir attirer l'attention de la communauté internationale pour venir accompagner la République du Congo, et c'est le discours officiel politique, dans les pistes et solutions qui vont aboutir à une meilleure conservation de cette grande ressource naturelle découverte. Nous vous montrons ici en image quelques efforts lors des descentes de terrain qui aboutissent au prélèvement de cette tourbière. En dehors de l'importance sur le plan environnemental et sur le plan politique, il y a que la grande tourbière de la République du Congo joue un rôle très important dans le flux et dans la circulation hydrique des différentes rivières qui couvrent, sinon qui traversent le nord de la République du Congo. Je dois attirer ici l'attention de tous les participants qui nous suivent à travers le monde sur le fait que la tourbière du Nord Congo est traversée par plusieurs grandes rivières, mais aussi par plusieurs petites rivières. Et vu que cette tourbière-là contient d'importantes quantités d'eau, cette tourbière joue un grand rôle dans la régulation de la circulation hydrique de l'eau entre les grandes et les petites rivières, mais aussi les lacs comme le lac Télé qui existe dans la partie nord de la République du Congo. Sur le plan socio-économique, je voudrais ici relever un point très important que nous avons observé lors de nos visites de terrain, c'est que les tourbières non forestières qui sont riches avec l'essence, le raffia, le lentilles, sont des véritables usines de production d'un vin local qui est beaucoup prisé par les populations. Un bidon peut rapporter jusqu'à environ 10 € par récolte, ce qui fait que d'après les enquêtes que nous avons menées sur le terrain, un habitant pouvait vendre jusqu'à 200 bidons par an et certaines estimations disent même plus que cela. Nous avons noté en termes chiffrés qu'un récolteur pouvait gagner jusqu'à environ 1 200 € par mois rien que par la vente d'un bidon de vin de palme. En dehors du fait que cela rapporte de l'argent aux populations locales, nous avons aussi l'importance sur le plan écologique partant du fait que ces tourbières-là sont riches en d'autres espèces animales, notamment les céphalophes, mais aussi l'on a retrouvé la présence de diverses espèces de poissons.
Great. Thank you very much to Ifo. I know we can hear us online, so we should give him a round of applause. Super. And next up, we've got Sophie Stotterson, who is our greenhouse gas flux expert.
Right. See if I can get the technology. So this one, that one, the big button. Fine. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk here. I'm going to present today our very first CO2 flux emissions from the Congo Peatlands, and we're going to compare that to some data that we got from Southeast Asia. So I'm going to start with some very basic things here. So in a peatland, the natural state is a high water table, and that high water table is associated with low CO2 emissions because the water stops the decomposition and it allows the peat to accumulate over thousands of years. If the water table is lowered through human intervention, we get high CO2 emissions. That's because you get oxygen into the peat, and microorganisms can then really quickly degrade the organic material, and you get high CO2 emissions. When the peat is dry, you also get higher fire risk, and if you have fire, you get also really, really large emissions of carbon dioxide. And under these conditions, the peat can very rapidly be lost. So human interventions such as farming, logging, road building on peatlands, it's always associated with lowering of the water tables, and that is then associated with increases in carbon dioxide emissions. The low water table, together with drought, makes these areas fire prone because you get very flammable substrate that's dry, and you can get large releases of carbon dioxide via the fires. Because of these rapid losses, although Simon has now talked about the huge carbon stores that we got in a peatland here in the Congo, peat can be very rapidly lost. You can lose several meters of peat over a decade through the combined processes of decomposition and fire. In many countries in the world, farm peatlands make a big contribution to the country's net greenhouse gas emissions. So in Indonesia and Malaysia, greenhouse gas emissions from farm peatlands contributes between 16 and 27% of those countries' total emissions. So it's a big, big contributor to emissions. And when you translate that to global figures, farm peatlands in Southeast Asia contribute between 0.4 and 0.7% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a big contributor. So by restoring peatlands, countries that has got farmed peatlands or degraded peatlands, they've got an opportunity to really improve on their country's emissions. And we recently estimated that the contribution or restoration of Indonesia's peatlands would contribute 17% of their current NDCs. So there's an opportunity to reverse these emissions. So this is really what I'm here to show. These are the first CO2 emission estimates from the Congo peatlands. And you can see the three bars to your right are from the Congo Basin. They are palm swamp forest, they are hardwood forest, and they're terra firma forest. And the CO2 emissions from those three forest types compare very well to CO2 emissions from intact forests in Southeast Asia. We're here somewhere at 25 tons of CO2 per hectare and year. When you look at the yellow and orange bars to your left, you can see that emissions are much higher, and those are from drained farm peatlands in Malaysia and Indonesia. So you can increase the emissions by a factor of 2 or 3 by draining the peatland and cultivating them. And these are even at sites which has got water table that's maintained at the recommended levels for agriculture on peatlands. So even under current best management practice, we're seeing really high emissions from the Southeast Asian farm peatlands, but really quite low emissions from the Congo peatlands, which is really good news here. So protecting these peatlands in the Congo Basin is really important for maintaining these low emissions. If the water tables are dropped, it's very likely that those emissions from the Congo basins would increase in line with what we've seen in Southeast Asia. So the peatlands have accumulated in the Congo Basin for a long time. Simon mentioned 42,000 years as the oldest peat deposits. And the deepest peats in the Congo is about 6 meters. The photograph here illustrates Christopher Banks, who is about 2 meters tall. And this difference here, peat loss over about 30 years, more than 2 meters, only happened in a couple of decades after those peatlands in Johor were drained. So it's taken 42,000 years to accumulate in the Congo situation, but that peat could very quickly be lost. So just because it's been there a long time doesn't mean that it's going to stay there a long time if the water is removed from those systems. So by restoring the systems, which is occurring now in Southeast Asia and in other parts of the world, you can reduce the loss rate. If you re-wet the peatlands, it's going to stop them from burning. It's going to stop the CO2 to be lost as rapidly. But it takes a long, long time for these systems to bring the carbon back in. So even though that you might stop the loss rate, you're not going to bring those 6 meters of peat back over a few decades. So it is really a question of protecting the peatlands, because it's almost an irreversible loss after that carbon has gone out of the system on our time scales. So these are my conclusions. Really, to keep the ground wet is a key thing for protecting the carbon that's in these peatlands. There is no sustainable way of draining these peatlands. If the peatlands are drained, they will lose the carbon. And protecting the peatlands in the Congo will maintain those low emissions, which is really important from a global perspective. Thank you.
And next up is Lyra Miles, who's going to talk about peatland protection and threats and opportunities.
We have some slides on the way. It's fabulous to be here representing Congo Peat from the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre, which is a partner of Congo Peat. And it's fabulous to have the opportunity to follow such a great range of speakers, but they might have said one or two of the things that I might have been going to say today, so I'll try and keep it short. First of all, just to emphasise the biodiversity value of the Central Congo Basin peatlands. We've heard a lot about the carbon value, and we have heard something about the wildlife value already, but here is just an illustration of the peatland forest in green, the areas that are likely to be peatland forest, and the distribution of threatened vertebrate species across this forest. So we're talking about threatened species such as western gorilla, forest elephant, and many others. And in the Congo Peat Partners meeting, it was really wonderful to hear some news from Catherine Meyer at Yale University, who's starting to study how come this forest can support such high numbers of western gorillas. So she's looking at their diet and she's interviewing local hunters, and hopefully we'll have some interesting results for us soon. However, as for so many tropical forests, there's an awful lot we don't know about the biodiversity of the ecosystem. So here we have a couple of maps from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility that are summarizing the presence data for species across the whole of the two Congos, compared on the right-hand side of the screen with the United Kingdom. And you can see at the bottom the number of presence records this represents. In the whole of the two Congo countries, there are less than 500,000 points, distribution points in this system. That's each point is an observation of a plant or an animal or a fungus, compared to the United Kingdom, where we have over 100 million points, representing a far smaller number of species. So there's an enormous amount still to discover about which parts of this vast forest ecosystem are most important for what types of biodiversity. And of course, we know that we have huge gaps in our understanding, not just of distribution, but of the very existence of species in the Congo Basin, as in any tropical rainforest. Although local communities will know quite a lot more about species than any of us coming from the outside world. There was a lovely example of just a 2-day survey in Lokutu of dragonflies and damselflies, which identified 86 species, of which 9 turned out to be new to science. So it doesn't, well, that should say, yes, it doesn't take a lot of effort from a few dedicated experts to discover new species in these ecosystems still. And within CongoPeat, Charlie Hackforth is starting out a PhD looking at insect communities, comparing what's happening in the peatlands forest with what's happening in the terra firma forest. And similarly, Joseph Kanyama has been looking at the vegetation communities. So alongside all of the amazing work on the peatland ecosystem, we are starting to find out a little bit more about the biodiversity. Moving on, we've heard a fair bit about the pressures already, and Simon showed some information around the forest concessions. This is just a highlight today. The forest has been really well protected by its remoteness. In red on the map, you can see forest cover loss. So we see a bit of deforestation happening around the margins of the peatland area. It's a little bit hard to know because of the verification that's still being done on the maps, how much of this forest cover loss is happening in terra firma versus on peatland forest. But also, as Simon showed, as soon as we start to see logging roads transversing the peatland forest, that is itself a threat. And we know that it's difficult to exploit this ecosystem. It's so wet. We know that it's harmful. So it really should be not a high priority for logging or for any kind of development of concessions. Some analysis from CongoPeat shows a little bit about the increase in deforestation that's happened over areas, again, that are likely to be peatland. This is data from Global Forest Watch, and it does show forest cover loss creeping up over time. Again, we saw from the map, this is all around the margins of the peatland area. And I should highlight that we're more confident in the data from before 2015 than the data from after 2015 here. But you can see there is an upward trend. So we're confident that something is going on here. But again, quite a bit more research is needed to understand how much it's affecting the actual peat swamp forest. And this analysis was done by Shona Jenkins of CongoPeat. So, opportunities. We've seen already, and I'm really happy to say, that both the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Congo have been making great efforts to protect this ecosystem. National and international protected areas have been declared over a great deal of the peatland extent, and as Cornet described in 2017, the 3 existing Ramsar sites that are, I'm not sure if you can see, are surrounded by a blue line on this map here. Those were declared a transboundary Ramsar sites by the 2 countries. So that's making a commitment to work together to protect the integrity of the ecosystem and to sustainably manage it. That one international site alone represents 129,000 kilometers squared, or according to the original map, about 45% of the peatland area. So that's a really significant sign that there's a very good intentions here. And of course, the Brazzaville Declaration that we've already heard about, signed in March, establishes that intention to work together to sustainably manage the region as a whole, with a particular emphasis on Lactele Lactumba. That declaration includes 11 commitments, including joint land use planning, an observatory for better data collection, a centre of excellence for training to steer and promote green growth. And we've heard about both countries' subsequent steps to re-emphasise that support. The declaration does call upon the international community for support to help protect these areas, which brings us to a question around what the connection might be to the efforts to protect forest under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change through REDD+. And the Brazzaville Declaration does say it'd be great if the international community, it doesn't say it'd be great, it says we will call upon the international community to review existing international mechanisms such as NDC's, the REDD+ programme, NAMAs, for integration of sustainable peatland management. At present, within REDD+, both countries have submitted reference emissions levels, thinking about their historical emissions to the UNEP-WCMC, and they're both assuming, probably rightly, that there haven't been any historical emissions from peatland. So there isn't any scope as things stand for payments for results from reduced emissions. You might think that the new standard, some of you may have heard of the new ArcTrees standard on payments for results for REDD+, which puts forward some rather stringent ways in which countries can measure their REDD+ results. You might think that that would help because its second version includes a way in which high forest, low deforestation countries can claim results for forest conservation, but that only covers tree biomass. So as it stands, that's not a mechanism. And it's great that we don't have significant historical emissions from this region. That's what we would like to hear. But it is still important to be able to fund the conservation and the sustainable development of the region. Last week, we did hear the donor community made an initial $1.5 billion pledge covering 2021 to 2025 and a commitment to attempt to raise further funds for the protection and maintenance of the Congo Basin forest as a whole. That did emphasize the peatland region. So that seems like a very good sign. We wait to hear how that's going to play out. But we need to find ways to use some of that funding to make sure that development strategies decrease poverty levels in this region whilst protecting the carbon and the biodiversity. Thank you.
Super. So we've now got, if all the speakers could move to the front so they're in the camera shot, and the other Congo Peat scientists who are on the panel, then we're going to have, question and answer session. So ask us anything. I think we might have questions online, maybe. Has anyone got a question from the floor? Yes. Have we got a roving microphone? Yeah. Lady on the right. We all should.
Good evening. My name is Sisva from Indonesia. I have a question to Dr. Ivo. Yeah, now we have been analyzing topography and water stock in peatland in West Kalimantan. Actually, I have met Dr. Ivo and Dr. Simon in 2018 in West Kalimantan. My question is, how is the topography characteristic in Congo Basin? Is there any specific criteria or characteristic? Since we know in Southeast Asia, the peatland is mostly rain-fed and form extensive dome? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
That's directed at you, Ifo.
Ok, je peux répondre en français. Hello?
Hello, go ahead.
Hi, Shona. Can I reply in French?
C'est possible.
Ok. Ok, merci beaucoup, chers collègues, pour votre question. Pour ce qui est de la topographie de la tourbière, il faut dire que les études qui ont été menées jusqu'à ce jour, je pense qu'ils ont fait l'objet d'une publication. Nous avons utilisé un drone dans une partie de cette grande tourbière. Nous ont montré que dans une partie de cette tourbière, notamment dans le département de la Likwala, il y avait l'existence d'un dôme, ce qui veut dire que pour ce qui est de la topographie, nous avons montré dans cette publication qu'on avait une accumulation de la tourbe et justement avec la présence de l'eau, cette accumulation continue s'est développée jusqu'à donner ce dôme-là. La publication existe, elle est disponible. On pourrait vous la partager pour avoir plus d'informations.
And I would add that we also have some water table sensors, and we don't see big flood waves coming into the interfluvial basins. And then we have this drone lidar, and we also have some aircraft lidar that shows that there can be domes of up to about 5 meters. So we do think that there's one type of peatlands which is rain-fed and a raised bog, but we also have peatlands in the Democratic Republic of Congo, close to the rivers, that are influenced by the rivers, and they are a bit different from the big interfluvial basins. So we think we have two different types at least of peatland. Do we have any other questions from the floor? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Jens Supke, University of Stirling, and I've been following the Congo Peat project. And it's been mind-boggling just to see the amount of peat, the amount of carbon. I was going to ask Sophie if you've looked at methane fluxes as well as CO2 fluxes, either in the Congo Basin or in other tropical peatlands. More out of curiosity, I don't think there's much you can do about management, but it would just be great to get a sense of what's there.
Thank you very much for the question, Jens. So yes, we have looked at methane emissions. We are looking at methane emissions both from the Southeast Asian systems, which I showed examples from, and from other tropical peatlands. And the methane emissions are these forests, they're flooded forests, and they do contribute methane into the atmosphere. And some of the sites, we measured in sites in Panama, and those forests are releasing quite a lot of methane. But we've not really finished the analysis of the data from the Congo sites. We have found some high emissions, so it's going to be interesting to understand the seasonal variability and the spatial variability of those emissions. But I think it's clear, so looking at the radiative balance and the value of protecting these sites, it's clear that having those low carbon dioxide emissions and the high water table really benefits that climate impact from these systems.
Hi, I'm Ed Mitchard from the University of Edinburgh. I do some of the satellite-based work on this, and just to add, we also have some top-down estimates of methane fluxes from satellite data, which suggests there aren't huge methane fluxes coming out, but they could be significant, and they do seem to vary quite a lot in space and time, as is common with the CO2 and methane. And we're Sophie and I have a PhD student who are investigating this further.
I'm going to take a question from online now. Now I can see them, and it says, "What is the typical rate of peat accumulation in tropical peatlands per year compared to the temperate zone?" Anyone know off the top of their head? I mean, they're very low accumulation. I mean, if you think our maximum peat depth is about 6 meters, and that's accumulating over most of the peatland sites are 20,000 years or less, and some are 40,000 years old, then that's a very low rate of peat accumulation. And what's different about the central Congo peatlands compared to Southeast Asia and also in Peru is that the composition of the peat itself is relatively decomposed. And that's because these peatlands are close to the edge of the level of wetness to keep peat forming. So in central Kalimantan, I think you have close to 3 meters of rain a year, whereas only about 1,700 millimeters in the central Congo basin. So it's much drier. And the same, it's drier than in the Peruvian peatlands, which are also 2.5 meters of rain a year. So the peat is more decomposed and there's less accumulation compared to the other two big kind of tropical peatland regions. Yes.
I can't remember the centimeters on the top of my head, but you do get higher accumulation rates when I've looked at of tropical peat accumulation compared to the boreal forest accumulation rates. But if it's 1.5 centimeter, 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter, I can't remember that, but they are higher.
And they, accumulate faster at the surface and then slowly decompose and get squashed as you go further back in time. Great. We had a question. Yeah, at the back.
Thank you for your session today. Actually, I'm from the private company in Japan. Our company is launching the rocket with satellite. Fortunately, this morning, we launched a new rocket with so many satellites. And I believe this satellite information would be the vulnerable contribution to protect the peatland. From your side, what is the expectation to the private company to protect the peatland in Congo Basin and Indonesia? That is a question. Thank you.
Do you want to have a go? Satellite man.
I don't know the satellite you're talking about, but maybe we should talk afterwards. That sounds very interesting indeed. We would fundamentally, most of the satellite data we have sees the top of the vegetation, and we want to know about what's under the ground and we can't see it. So yeah, I would love to to find any new information we can bring in to help understand what's really going on.
I think more generally, both of the Democratic Republic of Congo government and the Republic of Congo government are looking for and interested in a private sector to be involved in protecting those peatlands if they can provide resources to do so as part of carbon markets.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's weird with these on. Andrew Carr, UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, soon to be FCDO in Central Africa. I guess my question is a bit of a double header. What are your main barriers and challenges, A, from a scientific perspective, and B, from a policy and implementation perspective, so a management perspective? What do you see as the main issues that we need to overcome, particularly from maybe a UK aid perspective?
Good question. I think in terms of the science, we really struggle to get funding to be able to do the kind of capacity building that we would like to. I've never had a never had an African PhD student registered in the UK because it's so expensive for them to. There just aren't the grants available that would pay for them to get a PhD and become a researcher to understand their own peatlands. So I think there's a capacity issue which needs to be overcome, because then we'll have more advocates and more scientists who are able to do the work, like Corné and Ifo. There needs to be a community of peatland scientists, I think. I don't know what anyone else wants to add on terms of the science side.
I think the monitoring side of things, we've got these plots where we've measured biomass and gas fluxes, and by the end of the project, we've all had to sort of just pack it up and take it home. And we know that there's lots of interannual variability, and to understand long-term trends, to be able to capture over time how things are changing, I think really helps to properly understand, so you don't then take decisions based on like an odd year, or like you just measured in one particular location that's not representative.
I think it's important to get understand, the scale of the place is like an area, the peatland itself is an area the size of England, and we have essentially this one team working on trying to understand it. And it's a bit like where we were with understanding UK peatlands 100 or more years ago, where every single set of measurements we find out something completely new, because we're at that real frontier discovery stage rather than the kind of refinement stage.
So it's probably worth adding the challenge of doing that large scale work using the models, isn't it? So I'm Richard Betts from the University of Exeter and the Met Office Hadley Centre. So I'm a climate modeller, and the role of my team and others in the project is to use two models to really do the scaling up of this the ground-based and the observation-based information to understand the role of the peatlands in the global climate system. And the work that we'll do within the project, I think we'll make some big steps forward there in applying existing models and developing brand new models. But even then, that'll only be the start. We won't be able to put our new tropical peatland model into a full Earth system model. That'll be a multi-year challenge. So we need to be thinking ahead about how we're going to achieve that once we've done this first stage of developing our first tropical peatland model.
Yeah, I mean, the usual from scientists that, the continuity of funding to be able to keep going, and also incredibly important to keep those partnerships going in country and on the ground, because we can't do anything apart from being in partnership, and that requires some kind of regularity of funding, rather than you get a grant or you don't, and then you're stuck. In terms of the kind of policies and on the ground, I think there needs to be we heard from Lyra that the funding mechanisms for payments for ecosystem services don't really apply to the special case of the Congo Peatlands. And here we have somewhere that's really pretty intact and pretty pristine, and it's like, how do you have an incentive structure to keep it that way while raising local people's incomes? And there just needs to be more work around those kind of models. Lyra, do you want to?
Hi, and those on the remote call may wish to add as well. It feels like we're also really at the understanding of the beginning of understanding what kind of development trajectories local people would like to have. We're beginning to understand how people are using the peatlands. We're talking about very remote, very poor populations who are often dependent on fish or on subsistence agriculture. And some of the development models that you might have in other places where, say, there's fabulous ecotourism opportunity feel a little bit more challenging to implement in these places where access is very limited. So there's still a huge need for ecological research, but also that action research on the social science side. And I'm wondering whether Shona would like to say something.
Yeah, hi, I'll jump in there. Thanks, Lyra. So my name's Shona Jenkins. I'm a PhD student, part of CongoPeat at University of Edinburgh. And so I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is an additional requirement for future resources that needs to go into scientific research, is we've heard so much today about the need to map peatlands, to understand how they form, to inform future trajectories, to understand the greenhouse gas emissions. And I think we need to put equal emphasis on social science research and the evidence base that generates to tell us particularly why and what ways are the peatlands different, for example, from terra firma forests in the ways that they support local livelihoods. We need to start to dig down and to drill down to that fine-grained detail to identify what are the incentive structures and what are the ways in which peatlands, for example, support poverty alleviation, which is probably a little bit, but there are other policy areas that need to come into play, because as we know, the millions of people on the DRC side are living and have a lot of other areas of deprivation. So I think down the road, a policy response is not just going to relate to a RED mechanism or a payment for ecosystem services. It's going to relate to other policy areas like social care, like healthcare, like education, like access to transport, because these are all compounding issues that are leaving people trapped in poverty. So I think we need to open these conversations up and expand the social science research to get at that level of interdisciplinarity to start to build out these insights.
Great. We're out of time now, so I'm just going to give the floor to Ifo and Cornet and ask if they've got any final comments before we wrap up.
C'est un point très, très important, le point concernant la recherche des financements pour pouvoir soutenir tous les efforts allant dans le sens de la conservation et de la gestion durable. Je crois qu'il y a une publication qui est sortie juste en début de la COP où les ministres de l'environnement, mais aussi des forêts, les principaux pays du bassin du Congo, ont posté ce message pour inviter toute la communauté internationale à pouvoir aider cette partie du monde à, on va dire, mieux gérer cette ressource naturelle qu'est la tourbière. Donc, c'est un message qui est vrai, c'est un appel qui est vrai. Et nous, en tant que scientifiques, nous relayons ce message-là, cette invitation pour que la communauté internationale cesse avec les discours et les promesses non tenues, mais qu'on arrive réellement à engager des fonds qui vont permettre, d'une part, de soutenir la recherche, parce que jusqu'à présent, les études pour améliorer la connaissance de la tourbière ne sont qu'en début. On a suivi les communications, le point d'étape donné par le professeur Simon, on a suivi la communication donnée par notre ami le professeur Cornet, et les autres communications nous ont montré que lorsqu'on part d'un site tourbière à un autre, on ne cesse de découvrir. Cela veut dire que nous avons besoin de l'appui des financements, de l'appui des bailleurs, des financements pour nous permettre de continuer à collecter des données sur le terrain, d'une part, et d'autre part aussi, dans ces écosystèmes vivent des populations qui vivent dans un état de pauvreté, et nous avons noté quelques points de dégradation, bien que ça soit encore très faible, mais si rien n'est fait d'ici à quelques années, ces petits signaux de dégradation peuvent avoir de l'ampleur comme ce que le professeur Simon a présenté dans son exposé, des émissions importantes que nous avions notées en Asie du Sud-Est, notamment en Indonésie. Je pense que c'est ce que je puis dire pour l'instant. Merci.
To my side, I think it's the same challenges that we are facing in doing science, because we can't do science without funding, without money. So we have an important issue of capacity buildings. As Ifo said with all the numbers, 11 million of hectares in DRC, 5 million in the Republic of Congo are only covered by 2 persons. Ifo and myself in each country is to try to deal with the mapping and vegetation characterization. So we still need more and more capacity buildings. For example, in my country, I have only one PhD student who is working with me and Simon and within the Congo Peat. That is huge challenge. That how long are we going to take to cover the entire Congo Peat, Congo Basin peatlands? And without capacity building, without money, we can't do anything. So, but everybody is saying we are eager to see the result. That is, will not come spontaneously. We need more people.
Yeah.
So that means, for example, now CongoPeat is struggling to have found in country, we are stuck. So nothing is going on the field, but we're still waiting for the result or the data to be collected. I think that's most important challenges we have. And also associated to the building capacity, there might be development of infrastructure so that we run some basic analysis in countries. For example, we don't need to eye modeling, but we need basic evaluation or quantification of carbon that might be done in countries. And those infrastructure or good lab are not there. So thinking on Congo Peat, the central Congo peatlands, it's also development of in-country infrastructure so that we continue. And Shona said something very important on the monitoring. So far, we are getting the best good result on monitoring from the Republic of Congo, but nothing is going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Although we share the same landscape there, but there are some specificity that we should disentangle so that we come up with a full understanding of our peatlands. And the social science is very, very important for the management of our peatlands, both countries. We share the same culture, we share the same practices, but so far we are dealing more with biological science, but social science is lying beyond, and it may hamper getting to the best of the sustainable management of the peatlands. I think that's the most important. So if there might be assistance, should also target in-country scientists so that we can work like independently to complement the effort we are doing with the Congo Peat and now starting with JICA in Maindombe will be welcome.
Great, thank you. I think that's a fantastic place to wrap up. So thank you very much. We've got one announcement.
Thanks. A huge thank you to Simon and the panel for wrapping up what has been another inspiring day talking about global peatlands in the pavilion. So that wraps up the sessions in the physical pavilion for today. But online, on our online platform at the moment, you can join Repeat, who are coordinating a session in the networking space on our online platform about intergenerational peatland networking. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thanks, Simon.